witches, and welcome back to Activist Witch, where we discuss witchcraft and activism. You can call me Isha, my pronouns are she, they, and in today's video we're going to discuss the propaganda effect of entertainment media and the difference between visibility and representation, and the emptiness of witchcore. And we're going to do all of that through Florence and the Machine Everybody Scream music video, the song, and the forthcoming album. But before we get started, let me remind you that I've opened a Ko-fi, and now memberships are open. There are 3 tiers where you can join me for different activities, although nowadays nothing is ever behind a paywall when it has to do with educational content like this. But if you come there, you can directly support me and support my work here, and you can even get tarot readings with me Italian style. The low-income option starts at £5. And for the foreseeable future, part of my profits from tarot reading go directly to support Cuccius to Gaza, who supports Palestinian refugees in Cairo, and the Good Law Project, who's trying to bring back trans rights to the UK, because trans rights are human rights. So if you decide to support me there, thank you so very much. So, when in August, Universal Music released the single Everybody Scream by Florence and the Machine from her upcoming album of the same title, YouTube pushed it to me almost immediately. To me and to other witches, of course, and most other witches in my digital neighborhood reposted it with amazed descriptions of the witchiest thing I have ever seen. Awesome, isn't it? Visibility is so important. We see ourselves in media and we feel part of society and culture. Isn't that amazing? Well, when the video for Everybody Scream was released, my neurons had a bit of an apocalyptic party, so I recorded what was mostly a reaction to the music video itself at the time. In short, the video for Everybody Scream is a piece of media that lends itself incredibly well to explain the difference between the aesthetics that empty symbols, signifiers, of their original meaning, signified, and just want to give us a mood, a vibe, vibes rather than messages. Now, aesthetics usually come from a culture or rather subculture, plenty of times from marginalized groups, and they are easily brought to mainstream media exactly because once you empty them of their meaning of origin, you make it less controversial. If it doesn't have a message, there's nothing to be pro or against. But their stuff, capitalism can sell you, so that you can feel too, that you can embody the vibe in the form of, outfits, objects, merchandise, and indeed, music. So a moment of disclaimer here. I used to work in the music industry, and I have actually a soft spot for Florence because I followed the beginning of her career closely. And at times I sort of worked close-ish to her. We're talking about 2 decades ago though. I made this premise in the original reaction video and even in the written version of this essay in the naive belief that people who feel a parasocial relationship with her would understand that my critique was in no way ill-intentioned. But as you can imagine, that hope led to a mixed bag of results. That being said, what's going to be the foundation of my critique for Florence's work, especially the Everybody Scream song, video, and album that's coming out on Halloween 2025? Semiotics. Semiotics is the foundation, because in uni I was the nerd kid that if something could be catalogued in discrete elements, I was in it. I spent 2 years on my semiotics module, and basically I wrote my thesis on my BA on semiotics applied to music videos specifically. So you could say that this is, kinda my background. The video that I analyzed back then was I Can't Be With You by the Cranberries, which, since we're here, I wholeheartedly recommend you to go watch it. Because it's also filmed in a very witchy feeling. The band is in green fields, they're wearing red suits, but the similarities end there. Which is ironic, because in '95, when I Can't Be With You was filmed, the Cranberries were also part of Island Records, a label under Universal. I suspect that Dolores O'Riordan just wasn't as easy to give in to a mold built for her. Not that they didn't try, by all means, but when she showed up at the MTV Europe Music Awards in '95 with a shaved head, or when instead of inhabiting, the Irish fairy, she wore Doc Martens and androgynous wardrobe, I suspect that that was her way to say, fuck this, I'm doing music, why do I have to be domesticated as a monkey for any trend you want to put on me? Yeah, other disclaimer, Dolores was a personal acquaintance of mine, and actually the only artist that I worked with that didn't disappoint me on the human side. Anyway, semiotics. Yes, the point of semiotics, as the study of symbols, in media in this case, aims exactly at that, analyzing a piece of communication regardless of the author's intention, just based on the symbols and their associated values and meanings within its current sociocultural context. Which is also why any piece of media depicting any historical time still carries the values that are contemporary to its making rather than those of the times that it represents. Example, Bridgerton. Despite sharing historical diegetic time with, say, Pride and Prejudice, it does not share symbols or values with it, because Pride and Prejudice was written in 1813 with the symbolism and meanings associated to various elements that were common understanding to 1813 society. While Bridgerton, despite the historical time it places its character in, was written from 2000 to 2013, carrying the societal values, associations and symbolism of the early 21st century. With that premise in mind, observing the signs used and referenced in both the song and the video Everybody Scream, we can observe what signs and attached meanings are used in both. The first blatant observation, to me, was how the song and the video depict two different stories. The song, Everybody Scream, actually talks about the allegory of the stage as an altar, where a musician is seen as a god or goddess or, a higher human channeling divinity the moment that they step on the stage with a sea of faceless supplicants hailing them.
Get on the stage and I call her by her first name. Try to stay away, but I always meet her back at this place. Gives me everything, I feel no pain. I break down, get up, and do it all again. Because it's never enough, and she makes me feel loved. I can come here and scream as loud as I want.
It's the same with the second single, Sympathy Magic.
Memory fails me, names and faces blur. There is only after or before.
That's literally the description of Florence being on stage and the effect that that has on her. And Florence being both the musician that embodies and channels divinity and the offering is literally delivered by the lines.
Come on, tear me wide open, a terrible beast, let the chorus console me, sympathy magic.
So it's literally about how the performance is both sacrifice and the way that she feeds off the energy that is given to her by the audience. The chorus is brought up because it's what the audience sings back usually, so that is the sympathy magic. I sing to you, you sing back to me. The frenzy, the screaming, crying of people at a music concert, usually the closer to the first row, the more of this behavior will be observable, is something that defines modern live music experiences. Beatlemania is considered the starting point of this behavior, by the way. Specifically, the legends started in the 1960s during the first US tour by the Beatles, where, allegedly, Brian Epstein, their manager, paid local people during the first tour dates to literally pretend to have hysteric fits and augment the popularity and media coverage for the shows. The same legend has it that by the third date, no one needed to be paid, and girls were just fainting and screaming of their own volition. If we go along with this myth, what seems to be the natural and energetic way, very easily described as magic, that conveys this exchange between divinity in the form of a musician and the adoring congregation in the form of the audience, that didn't start naturally at all. It was even in and of itself a capitalist tool for popularity. Now, because the frenzy, the magic, the inexplicable crackling of energy between the first row barriers and the stage is exactly the reason why I had been wanting to work in the music industry since I went to my first gig at 12 years old. Believe me, I have spent a lot of time studying the phenomenon, rationalizing it, and trying to understand its value for the audience. And it didn't escape me how the record industry also weaponizes something as ineffable as that gut feeling and connection that music, arguably is an extension of poetry, creates with people. The parasociality, the connection that makes people feel like a person speaks to them with words they wish they had. So in a way, the artist speaks for them. When in practical terms, the moment the music becomes a product, the person becomes a brand. That music industry executive job is literally to exploit. And I'm not using this word lightly, that is exact wording of copyright law, by the way, to exploit. Music creates a level of brand loyalty that consumer product marketing can only dream to inspire, because exactly of how it taps into emotions and feelings. And Q Bernays, the father of advertisement and propaganda and nephew of Freud, we talked about him before.
What Bernays had created was the idea that if a woman smoked, it made her more powerful and independent, an idea that still persists today. It made him realize that it was possible to persuade people to behave irrationally if you link products to their emotional desires and feelings. The idea that smoking actually made women freer was completely irrational, but it made them feel more independent. It meant that irrelevant objects could become powerful emotional symbols of how you wanted to be seen by others.
If that sparkling energy was the reason why I had been dreaming of working in the music industry since I was 12, imagine my shock when I finally managed to get there and found out that no one cared about that connection, but everybody knew how to exploit it for sales. And that's the first point that I tried to make. The ethereal art and aesthetic of Florence targets an audience with a certain kind of sensitivity. Individuals who feel like they are lonely and misunderstood by the rest of the world and find in Florence the words to describe their inner world. You can see how this perceived connection fosters a tendency to acquire the other signifiers from Florence brand in the belief that the connection can grow on multiple other levels, which makes it the wet dream of marketing executives. Oh, you feel the connection to music? Oh, I can sell you an entire world of related merchandise and experiences that will give you the feeling of closeness and recognition to what you think is a person, but really is the brand that dozens of Universal Music executives have built and curated in the last 17 years. Back to the object of analysis. If the lyrics of Everybody Scream are about the allegory of the stage and the codependence or interdependence, choose the term more apt, depending on the level of healthiness that best describes the parasociality of different fans, of the supplicants or the audience addicted to the artist's work, note how the divinity/artist is also addicted to the veneration and attention.
But look at me run myself ragged, blood on the stage. But how can I leave you when you're screaming my name?
Yeah, what the heck does witchcraft have to do with it? Because the music video, directed by Autumn the Wild, does not show the allegory of the stage, like at all. And by the way, I love the allegory of the stage. I think it's fucking brilliant that it addressed the double role of the artist as divine embodiment and offering on the altar at the same time, when the altar is the stage. The music video of Everybody Scream uses the signifiers of the witch, the Scarlet Woman, the troubled, strong, independent woman in heels, walking in the countryside, like way to make life harder for you, sister. Unsurprisingly, the signifier of which, in contemporary culture, carries meanings of rebellion. Watching the video repeatedly, in an extreme stretch of imagination, I concede to the vague but possible option that the rebellion depicted can be signified by the softcore fight against the figure of the backwards cowboy, which could be a signifier of toxic masculinity. And as the only one seemingly non-susceptible to the frenzy that Florence and the witches bring to the country house they all find themselves in, it I will concede to that. But that is assuming a lot of heavy lifting from the old audience. Maybe if they do, there could be a vague message of scream at the patriarchy. Hey, go on, I want to see that. The signifiers are there. However, the issue with the witchcraft iconography is in the visual signifier chosen to characterize the representation of supernatural witchcraft in the form of the frenzy and fit that people in the video are subject to. The hysteric, the syncopated movements depicted in the character listed as witches in the end credits, and the frenzy that seems to contaminate bystanders in the country house, are all supposed to deliver magic. Well, what some of my most astute commenters on the original video highlighted is that at best, what these visuals deliver is the idea of witchcraft from the lens of Christianity. The frenzy depicted is something you find references mostly in Christian evangelists. Healers, the people speaking in tongues, it's the idea of possession that Christians have. Now, the immediate issue with representing witchcraft through the lens of Christianity is that this is a depiction from the point of view of the abuser in power. Modern witchcraft revival, as a form of rebellion in the visual of the feral woman against the system, comes from the reclamation movement of the 1970s, which is closely connected to second-wave feminism and headed by the likes of feminist witch activists such as Starhawk. The modern use of the word witch in and of itself is a reclamation of the term that, during the witch trials between the 15th and 17th century, was used as a behavioral threat mainly against marginalized women who did not abide by the rules of the patriarchal system that was endorsing the movement from feudalism to modern capitalism. Yes, I'm quoting Caliban and the Witch by Silvia Federici. It explains it all. I highly recommend it. It's free on the Internet Archive. I'll put a link down in the description below. In short, the visual used in the Everybody Scream music video to depict witchcraft are through a very white colonial lens of what magic is and why it's dangerous. It's the visual of the demonic possession that requires priests to be exorcised.
The point is the emotion you're trying to elicit, and you can elicit very strong emotions with essentially offensive imagery.
And this is the first conclusion on this music video. Everybody Screams uses signifiers connected to witchcraft, empty them completely of their cultural signified, to sell a vague idea of rebellion, an aesthetic of witchcraft empty enough that anyone can project whatever they want about their own rebellion, and will therefore happily buy the products connected to this piece of media because it will make them feel that their rebellion is seen, validated, recognized, it exists. Like another very astute commenter on the original video said,
"You're equal, you're out there, now buy these products."
This should be the most stark reminder of the fact that before being an artist, and well before being a human whom her audience feel a personal connection to, Florence Welch, Florence and the Machine themselves, are a brand owned and sold by Universal Music Group, the biggest multinational music corporation in the world in the last 2 decades, operating within capitalism with the aim to sell products at a profit. This is the fundamental cornerstone of the actual machine around Florence. The second issue is visibility versus representation, and how visibility is just a pacifier to appease people from marginalized cultures and identities, but also to make sure that without representation, none of these cultures and identities will be elevated above their station on the spectrum that they occupy, that in the case of witchcraft, goes from quirky to crazy within the capitalist, patriarchal, white supremacist, ableist system that we are all under.
Visibility is the pride flag on the Twitter profile. Representation is the people who actually work there and the policies that actually support them. At the core of it, visibility is some form of currency that occasionally exchanges for some goodwill, but rarely anything more. Representation is a form of recognition.
Contrary to popular belief, and despite the way capitalism needs fascism to survive, let's talk about primitive accumulation, the capitalist system is not that skittish about showing to as many people as possible what they want to see, to feel validated enough to buy whatever merchandise capitalism will connect to that validation. And it will convince us that we need that stuff in order to sustain that validation. Offering visibility to marginalized cultures and identities is one of the crumbs that the capitalist system offers, even to the people at the margins, to quite simply pacify them. See, people like you are shown in media, therefore normalized. So really, you don't need to fight the system, not at all. What you need to do is buy those products that will reinforce your identity and make you recognizable at a glance to people who share your traits, so that you'll find community for a price. So that energy you spend in fighting for representation, spend it working to make money, to buy what will make you feel validated. Representation, on the other hand, keeps the meaning and values connected to the signifiers, to the symbols, and attempts to contextualize identities and cultures in ways that are authentic, albeit less gut reaction inducing than, I don't know, in the case of witches, think the hag from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937. Or indeed, the witches that have to arch their back, exorcist style, in Florence and the Machine's music video. See, representation is not shocking and doesn't need to shock. Representation is what furthers the acceptance of marginalized cultures and identities because it shows the humanity in it and the commonality in the experience of existence that all human beings share. It's completely understandable in this day and age, where we've been trained since the introduction of social media notifications to the quick dopamine release, why negative and even offensive imagery used for visibility is preferable to representation. Because in social media culture, where attention and engagement are arguably the goods more precious than individual purchasing power, because it turns individual into the product that social media platforms, from Facebook to TikTok to YouTube, sell to their advertisers and investors, the shocking gut reaction elicited by grotesque caricatures will catch more attention and start more discussions. And I know that it's very meta of me to say in a video essay that literally exists because of how controversial this video is, if you have the ability to understand why. But that's the thing, it will keep more people engaged and present with a gut feeling that churns and makes them see red enough to leave a comment on Instagram, on YouTube, on Substack. It's rage bait. And this, indeed, is my reluctant compliance to this discourse. I use the pastiche of René Magritte's The Treachery of Images exactly because I know how controversial that looks. But what seems to feed in this self-phagocytizing culture of rage that the attention market lives off of, I have done in the hope to reach those few who, after finding this information, will be empowered to make more educated choices, because they might get a speck more of understanding about how the system they find themselves in works. Which accidentally helps me introduce the next part, inspired by a certain kind of comment that just dismissed the knowledge I shared as, why do you have to bother? Don't you all have real problems to deal with? I swear that's an actual comment that I got about the video, the first one. Now, before going into why that mindset is exactly how entertainment media primes you to acquire uncritically the set of values that it portrays, media portrays, embedding it in your mind in what becomes unconscious bias, there's a more personal reasoning of mine. I could argue, by this point, I've accumulated an accidental wealth of knowledge that lets me understand relatively clearly the systems of oppression that we are part of. And, I can prove the factuality of the things that I discuss and analyze with receipts rather than what most people without this foundation think, that this is my opinion and therefore it matters as much as their uneducated one. If we want to be petty, we could say that I can prove why I'm right. And that's what most people with a parasocial relationship to Florence, or anything that I've critiqued so far, has felt the need to show their defensiveness for what they feel is an intrinsic part of their identity, Florence the brand, as if it was an attack to her, and so they feel the need to do a personal attack to me. But there's another crucial thing, and it is that one of my core values is to share my understanding of the systems, from products to media to superficially progressive ideas like love and light, and how they play into the pacification of the masses. Because it kept me quiet for too long a time, so I simplify and share my understanding of the world in the hope that the person who feels like Isha when she was 12, but has no understanding of what the issues were, let alone how to fight them, can get there easier and quicker than I did, hopefully helping to change the world faster than I could. One of the most interesting rebuttals to my analysis was the request to demand, depending on different people expressing the same need, for me to stop analyzing things. Those who took the time to provide a reason as to why understanding the motives behind a piece of media through media analysis was bad, came up with the belief that
some things are just meant to be felt and enjoyed, not picked apart under a microscope.
Entertainment specifically is seen as one such thing. This is not the first time that I received this criticism of my critique on a piece of media. My analysis of the Disney's Marvel Cinematic Universe as reactionary propaganda received the same annoyed feedback. Why do you have to take away my entertainment? Why can't I even relax mindlessly now? You have to judge that as well? No wonder you lefties are no fans at parties. In propaganda all along, I went as far as to using quotes from the Cuban government as to why they look with rightful skepticism at the free offers from the US to bring the internet and with it entertainment, indeed, such as Marvel. And they want to bring it to the socialist country. Why?
We are not against new technologies. We simply have to understand them and use them in our interest, but we also need to know how the enemy will use them.
Which just shows the simple understanding of how entertainment media has the ability to affect people's internal values and biases, especially about things they don't know firsthand in their lives. And the consciousness that without media literacy and critical thinking, if entertainment keeps showing you for decades that, I don't know, terrorists are Arabs wearing keffiyehs, well, news media will need to do very little on top of that belief, cemented by entertainment media, to make you believe, for 75 years, that Israel has a right to exist and defend itself from the animalistic terrorists that are Arabs and therefore Palestinians. Yeah, entertainment media is arguably the most effective kind of propaganda, because through narratives and stories, which is the easiest way to deliver information to human beings, by the way, it can portray opinions and values, masquerading them as mere entertainment that's not worth our critical thinking. And when we consume entertainment without our critical mind inquiring why we are shown the things that we are shown, it's very easy to internalize the values that are presented as reasonable in stories that we are consuming, especially when we are paying a ticket for it. I'm paying my Disney Plus subscription. I really hope you don't anymore. Surely I'm not paying to be brainwashed. Without critical thinking, you don't ask yourself, why are the bad terrorists wearing keffiyehs? You just start associating keffiyehs with terrorists, even if nothing but entertainment media has shown you that signifier, keffiyeh, associated with that signified, terrorists. And that's how your racist unconscious bias against Arab people being terrorists is born. Congratulations. Now multiply it for every spoke of the wheel of privilege, which we're going to look more closely in the next section, and look at the margins of it. Do you notice how the further away from the center of the wheel, the more those identities and roles make you uncomfortable? Do you know why? Well, because media has shown you homeless people as disgusting, visibly disabled people just as worth your pity, poor people lazy, really. Fat people, they are willful weights on society, and so on and so forth. Do you know where that beliefs come from, despite the fact that most likely you don't know people in those categories directly? At least not all of them. Media visibility of those categories in a negative connotation. Because the entertainment within a capitalist system has to demonize anyone who does not accept and execute their function as a cog in the system that reinforces the white, cis, het, ableist supremacy of patriarchy. Boom.
Like you told me that it would. So come on, tear me wide open till I'm losing my mind.
Another criticism to try and invalidate the entire analysis was, witches are not a marginalized identity, so criticizing Florence for not providing representation, moot point. This is where we go in the Wheel of Privilege. To understand the meaning and context of marginalization, the Wheel of Privilege might be the first useful tool to consider here. I find this to be the best cornerstone to explain intersectionality, which is why I do in my day job, by the way. So this is a graphic representation of what is considered normal at the center of the wheel, while every spoke represents a sliver of identity or a social role. Now, whilst identity by nature cannot change, which, by the way, is why fascists ultimately aim to the erasure of people that they do not accept the identity of. Like, for example, non-white people, trans people, LGBT people, basically anyone with immutable characteristics in the margins category of the wheel. But yeah, there are things you can't change. There are sociocultural roles that can vary throughout someone's life, like education, marriage status, all that kind of thing. Now, let's take witch. While the identity of witch can be covert, so different from, say, race, it can be hidden and undisclosed if the witch so decides, its marginalization is represented in the spoke of the Wheel of Privilege that describes religion and, arguably, mental health, but more on that later. And in the current sociocultural context we are all in, the center of the wheel, therefore the power of credibility and authority, guess who holds it? Christofascists, but Christians, let's say Christians, followed by anyone who is at least following the Christian holidays, so, you know, culturally Christian. Think how codified in everybody's calendar is, regardless of religious belief, that we have Christmas holidays, for example. With anyone else looked down upon or ridiculed. I mean, see the outrage of the right at saying Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas, when people just try to be respectful to any non-Christians. No, you can't. Christians forever! And that's not fascism. They say it's not. Like we don't have eyes. But if that still doesn't seem like it should be considered a marginalization for the aforementioned disclosure, so you can hide it, the following might give you an idea why witchcraft, and anyone practicing it, is still legally discriminated against. Tell me again that witchcraft is not political? Now, here in the UK, while the Witchcraft Act of 1753 was repealed in the UK in 1951, it was repealed in order to make room for the Fraudulent Medium Act of 1951, which after 2008 was replaced itself by the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulation 2008, and then in 2024 by the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act. Now, without going into the details of all these laws, but there are links, suffice to say that they give room to credit card payment processing providers to provide their services to witches at their discretion. Much like major credit card companies such as Visa have taken it upon themselves to choose for you whether you can or cannot buy adult content with a Visa credit card that you own and links to your bank account. So effectively, Visa gets to decide what you can spend your own money on. And the same way providers of financial technology services such as SumUp, which is the most popular card reader provider in the UK, has decided that if you take payments for a tarot reading and openly declared so in the receipt you provide to your customer, SumUp will not allow you to take payment for it, despite your customer making an educated decision to buy one from you, whether for fortune-telling or entertainment purposes. SumUp categorizes any business under the vague label of occult in the same restricted category as bestiality pornographic content, amongst others. and then enlist fortune-telling as part of their restricted businesses according to the license they have been given by financial regulators, which indeed can include the discretionary choices made indeed by credit card providers such as Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. You're not convinced? This is the email that I received the morning after reading tarot at a local market last year, and I took payments with a SumUp card reader. And the transactions, I was honest, they were listed as card reading.
As a regulated financial entity, we have to follow rules and regulations set by the financial regulator, the card schemes, and our acquiring banks. Due to our licensing restrictions, we cannot support certain businesses or payments. After a review of your profile, we regret to inform you that your business model falls within the restricted business category that we are unable to support. As we can't support your business model, we have closed your profile. Please note, since your SumUp card is blocked, you'll no longer be able to use it.
And this is just one example, and it describes only one of the effects of marginalizations of being an overt witch. But it describes the institutionally codified way in which the legal and economic systems reject our existence and forbid us to make a living out of it within the current legal framework. Simply put, it makes it impossible for us witches to make an honest living according to its own definition of honest, regardless of our client or our own informed decision to practice and pay for our services. And to be completely fair with you, we should talk about how these laws are also specifically targeting traveler communities and are racist extensions of anti-Romani sentiments. But for more of that, I will invite you to check Romani Scientists on Instagram. They know more and they know better and they know directly. Suffice to say that the Vagrancy Act 1824, under which fortune-telling, astrology and spiritualism became punishable offences, has not been repealed yet. And to this day, in England and Wales, under this law, the simple act of begging or sleeping rough are criminal offences. But a more insidious issue comes from the misunderstanding of intersectionality and the use of the spokes of the wheel of privilege as simple categories to compare and put in competition with each other. Oh, being a marginalized race is worse than being homeless, or being uneducated is better than being poor. This still applies the competitive lens that's intrinsic to capitalism to marginalized people, trying to divide and conquer them. It's what the right thinks that the oppression Olympics are, which reveals their skewed optics that serve hierarchy as long as they are on top, while breaking the wheel of privilege should be the aim for anyone interested in community and equity. Using as an example another comment that I received in that original video that claimed that witches are not a marginalized identity, this was the argument that they presented.
So to be clear, as a white woman and a practicing witch and a lesbian living in a comfy blue state, I'm a marginalized person? That's what it boils down to?
And no, it's not what it boils down to. What it boils down to is that applying an intersectional lens to marginalization is not a simple tally of the ways we are marginalized, but the way the marginalizations compound. To give you an example, when I started to speak in favor of Palestine, as a person who is Arab, queer, femme-presenting, non-binary, disabled, whose English sounds foreign, and who lives on benefits due to their disabilities and autism, my main concern was for the charities that I was aiming to help and support, because I immediately knew that every step that separated me from the center of the wheel removed legitimacy and authority to anything I said and did. And I was afraid that my support for Palestine as a witch and the creation of Witches for Palestine would have taken credibility away from the Palestinian cause because of all of that. Now, instead, take a lesbian white woman as the person who left that comment. Why is it relevant to begin with to say that she lives in a blue state? Might it be because if she didn't, she would have been marginalized? More importantly, how does the marginalization of witch compounds on her being queer and a woman? Because yes, both those categories aren't in the center of the wheel. They'd have to be a straight man to be established authority and power. But she's still white. And that is a category that belongs to the center of the wheel of privilege in a white supremacist racist system that we are currently all in. The point I'm trying to make here is, how many marginalizations do you need compounded for the identity and label of which to move your position in the spectrum that goes from quirky to crazy as a person? Arguably, the more visible our belonging to a marginalized category is, the more risk in admitting overtly to yet another marginalization. As a white cis queer woman who declares herself a witch, she's on the quirky side of the spectrum. She might be considered to be having, an original spirituality, but their authority derived by other privileges granted to her, first and foremost her whiteness, isn't questioned. Or at least it isn't questioned as much on her as it is on me. As a brown, trans non-binary, femme-presenting, fat, autistic, disabled person whose spoken English carries an unchangeable accent that reveals I wasn't born in the UK, my credibility and epistemic authority were never there to begin with, which is why, to every dismissive ad hominem comment, my reply has to come always with receipts, with bibliography, with links, with books, and even then, most people will not bother checking those sources, not because they're not valid, but because the simple fact that they come from someone where all those marginalizations compound, it takes authority away from the sources themselves. They cannot be valid if someone who deserves no respect like me has chosen them. That's what they think. The scrutiny that someone with multiple marginalizations is subject to gets harsher the further away from the center of power their position is on multiple spokes of the wheel of privilege. Have you ever thought how, given any marginalization you might embody, you have to work twice as hard as a cis white hat able rich man? Okay, now compound that, the more intersections your marginalization lives at. And imagine how, no matter the proof you can bring, any subject you discuss about can become tainted just by mere association with you. That is how intersectionality compounds. And here is part of the reply that I gave to the aforementioned white cis lesbian in the blue state, to which they never replied back. Because I just waste my time with these people, that's the truth of it. The fact that I cannot use my full name on the work I do as a witch for the prejudice that would put on me if I were ever to need to do public-facing stuff is the marginalization. You might not think about it because it doesn't impact your credibility or life, but to claim being an openly practicing witch is not a marginalization is lacking comprehension of what a marginalization and a dominant power are. And again, marginalizations compound. So I'm sure that if you are white and straight passing, you declaring yourself a witch sounds quirky. If I say it as a fat, visibly queer, autistic immigrant of color, I'm crazy. I literally had to make a video to explain why the quirky manic pixie dream girlish feeling does not apply to someone like me. When I say I'm a witch, on me, the word compounds.
Scream as loud as I will.
Yeah, I use the term class consciousness liberally here as an awareness of people about their position in terms of power, subjugation, and marginalizations, according to the intersectional fundamentals described in the Wheel of Privilege, which is a broad extension of Marx's concept of class consciousness. Marx believed that once the working class would gain class consciousness as a result of its experience of exploitation, they would then be able to recognize the ruling class as the enemy that forces their lives to be subjugated to labor to attain the simple means of survival, selling their labor in order to have shelter and food and basic dignities that the rise of capitalism made into commodities to be earned rather than dignity, basic. It's the oxymoronic idea that living itself has a cost that needs to be paid in order to earn our survival as human beings. And by the way, since publishing the written form of this essay, I had the most peculiar comment coming from a man, a cis, white, disabled man, which I think is one of the many proofs that I got from comments that showed that until people are ready for class and marginalization consciousness, being taught why they are oppressed and what they should fight back against, gets them mad at the person who makes them aware of the system and not the system itself. It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
Is it not true that living does have a cost that must be paid? Do not all organisms have to struggle for survival?
No, it's not true. Here's why. If you want to justify the cost of living with the idea of animals and lions hunting gazelles, then the obvious first difference is that, guess what? We evolved intelligence and consciousness, along with the ability to provide essential basic needs like food, housing, and healthcare for people. Corporations decide to throw away tons of food, tons of clothing to not lower the value of it. Landlords decide to leave houses empty to create artificial scarcity and increase the value of their assets when we have more empty houses than homeless people in the world. So, the first fallacy in justifying living having a cost because we have to struggle for resources seems to not take into consideration the last 12,000 years of anthropological and sociological evolution and why people do not operate only on instinct like animals that have to hunt to survive. On top of it, and exactly on the issue of disability, this reminded me of the discussion around when did the first sign of civilization arise? And civilization, arguably, are another way in which you can separate humans from animals. One of the stories about when did civilization start is the one from anthropologist Margaret Mead. And she suggested that the first sign of civilization was a skeleton found with a broken and healed femur bone, explaining that for that bone fracture to heal, the people around that injured person had to actively help them, to get them food, to help them walk, and yet they did, unlike most animals that when injured are left to die because no longer able to fulfill nature's requirement to hunt in order to eat to survive. The difference is that as humans, we tamed the environment so much to our needs. The scarcity and cost of living for us hasn't come from nature in millennia. But it comes from people who are in control of these things that our life and dignity depends upon, the billionaires, the bourgeoisie, according to Marx. Hence, I stand by what I said. Living shouldn't have a cost, because it doesn't. When we put a label on a bottle of water, there's no added value, only a ticketed entrance. Nestlé is trying to make springs, water springs, copyrighted. None of their additional work around water, like the bottle or the label, are necessary. We are paying a premium price to access a resource that is free to corporations, which, by the way, most of capitalism currently is still based on some form of slavery, of getting something for nothing and selling it for a premium. It's called primitive accumulation. The witch trials were a side effect of the primitive accumulation that took away the common land and privatized it in the Middle Ages. And again, if anybody is interested in the subject, Caliban and the Witch tells you everything that you need to know historically about the rise of capitalism and how unnatural what you call the natural cost is, along with why witchcraft is political. Back to the point of why we're not ready for any level of consciousness when we shoot the messenger, in this case, me. In making media critiques with language and concepts easily accessible to the masses, my ambition was to provide to the people caught in the marketing machine that sells Florence the brand under the carefully constructed delusion that the audience really knows and accesses Florence the person. I wanted to provide them the means to understand a sliver of the systems of power they are unconsciously exploited by. My questionable belief rises from my personal experience and the hope that, had I been provided with analytical tools to understand the systems of power that oppressed me, I would have been able to take action towards their dismantling sooner rather than later in life. My naive belief, if you will, is that whoever you are, you might be in a similar position of confusion and ignorance as I have been for most of my life. And so here I am, simplifying and rendering concepts that explain why capitalism is the opposite of community, why trans rights are part of the inviolable rights of bodily autonomy that patriarchy has tried to take from women ever since the witch trials. What systems of oppressions are we embedded in and we have been made to believe are normality, but it's an unjust and unfair normality that can and should be changed. And the first step to take action is awareness. Name the systems of power. Show how they affect the smallest things in our lives and empower people to make their own educated choices. What I did not realize is that a lot of people will resent being given the tools to understand the system, because along with awareness comes responsibility. Now that you know the world is wrong, unequal, and exploitative, not by chance but by design, what kind of person are you if you stand complacently still? Following the publication of the reaction to Florence video, the main criticism that I received was surprisingly from the very same people that I sought to help and hoped that rendering the analysis through accessible language would have given them the means to understand how capitalism cares for them only as consumers of the Florence product, and how it only seeks to extract money and attention that becomes still money to them from the audience. But the average Florence fan that found my first video, they were not distraught and seeking to push back with their own critique or analysis of her value. No. The main reaction was the villainization of myself, the disregard of the theory that I applied to reveal to them that the Florence they adore is a consumer product. That is the nature of Florence the brand rather than Florence the person, despite the fact that the brand has been presented to them as if the person would be their best friend, if only they could get close enough, legitimately enough. And the marketing machine is there to tell us, hey, I can sell you something to get closer to her. And instead, cue the ad hominem attacks to me rather than the in wars reflection.
Florence is a better witch representation than you. It's quite obvious.
And you know what? She might very well be a better representation than me, because the marketing image of the witch has moved from the hag to the beautiful, lithe temptress because it sells better, which I know I don't even remotely fit that look. The mix between Florence Welch's private personal life and the aesthetic used by Universal Music Group to represent Florence the brand under that name has clearly achieved success when consumers have been convinced that there is a person they don't know that they need to defend, spending in this way extra energy on top of the attention and the money that they are already directly pouring on Florence the brand. Florence the brand, whom they perceive as a person that they are close to and therefore need to defend like they would a friend. A friend that they will fight for against any person who tries to show and explains to them the web of marketing that has weaponized their loneliness and need for community, which is exactly what I mean when I talked about capitalism selling us criticism of itself, since it thrives on isolation and individuality to spur the need to buy products in the delusion that the alienation will subside with enough signifiers plucked from a culture into an aesthetic. But no, Florence is a friend that has studied their behavior, their purchasing behavior, to serve them just enough echoes of rebellion, packaged in the empty symbolism of the last 60 years that the feminist culture has worked to build, hoping the signifiers can still entice enough to sell Florence the brand next album, Everybody Scream. And the last ironic jab at the carved carcass of the witchcraft that they use to sell their product is the release date, 31st of October 2025. Here's something you need to buy to be part of this coven of witches under Florence. Buy the new album now. Happy Halloween, witches.
Really, the title came for Everybody Scream because I really wanted to write a song that rhymed with Florence and the Machine. That's
like, oh, dream, no, da da da. And there was a playlist somewhere that was like songs to scream along to. I was like, what does that mean?